Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 5th of November here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, US voters head to the polls in a presidential election likely to have global ramifications.
Traders gear up to capture market swings as too close to call polling between Harris and Trump drives uncertainty.
Plus, an exclusive look inside the floating armories that keep profits flowing from Russia's oil fleet, despite widespread sanctions.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have made a final push for votes ahead of today's US presidential election. Polling continues to show a race deadlocked both nationally and across the swing states. Both candidates spent their final day on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania, the state key to both sides' chances. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to supporters in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, we are not going back. We're not going back. We're not going back. And we are not going back because America is ready for a fresh start.
Harris was joined at events on her final day of campaigning by a host of stars, including Lady Gaga, Oprah Winfrey and Katy Perry, as attention switched from persuading undecided voters to get out the vote operations. On Monday, the podcaster Joe Rogan announced that he's endorsing Donald Trump after recording an episode of his show with fellow supporter Elon Musk.
At his own event in Pittsburgh, Donald Trump said that this would be his final campaign. The former president also told supporters they, quote, did not have to settle for weakness. He also once again accused Democrats, without evidence, of attempting to cheat.
This is that big, powerful, vicious party. No, it's a vicious machine. I mean, they can take all these bad ideas and win elections. It's like there's only way you could do that. One way. There's only one way.
Harris's campaign has warned that Trump may try to prematurely declare victory or allege that battlegrounds that are still counting votes are engaged in fraud. By the end of election night, near-complete results are likely from North Carolina, Georgia and northern Michigan, but tallies from Wisconsin and Pennsylvania will be expected to trickle in throughout Wednesday. We will have full non-stop rolling coverage across Bloomberg Radio on results night, with the latest updates available via your News Now audiocast on Apple, Spotify, Alexa and the Bloomberg website.
Equity traders are deciding to stay on the sidelines of the coin toss US election. Ahead of voting starting later today, stocks failed to gain traction and bonds climbed amid narrowly split polls. Mike Wilson, chief US equity strategist at Morgan Stanley, says there's a lot of uncertainty.
I think there's scope for further follow-through in certain quote-unquote Trump trades. At the same time, there's probably, the other side, which is I think a lot of the negative trades have played out for the Trump trades. I mean, bonds have sold off probably too much, and the renewables and things like consumer goods companies that will be hurt by tariffs have really been hammered. So if Harris wins, you could see a pretty big rebound in some markets. So there's a lot of permutations here.
Mike Wilson from Morgan Stanley speaking there. Also preventing traders making riskier bets are catalysts around the vote, including Thursday's Federal Reserve rate decision and US earnings reports.
Elon Musk's daily $1 million voter giveaway has survived a legal challenge by Philadelphia's district attorney. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has the story.
Pennsylvania Judge Angelo Foglietta rejected a request to halt the contest by the DA, who called it an illegal lottery. The ruling, which did not include any reasoning, came shortly after a hearing where Musk's lawyer said that the contest winners were not picked at random. Musk's pro-Donald Trump America PAC has been giving away $1 million every day until Election Day to people who signed a petition calling for free speech and the right to bear arms. The winner must be a registered voter in a swing state. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Boeing's workers have voted to end a strike that's crippled the plane maker for 7 weeks. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers agreed to return to work for a 38% increase in wages. Their District 751 President John Holden says it's a win for the union.
They secured a victory. They voted by 59% to accept the agreement, and they get to move forward. The strike will end, and now it's our job to get back to work and start building the airplanes, increase the rates, and bring this company back to financial success.
Holden there, who led the striking workers who had rejected 3 previous deals. The breakthrough represents a major victory for new Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg, who faces the challenge of turning the struggling plane maker around.
A British Chancellor is joining a Eurozone finance ministers meeting for the first time since the UK left the EU in 2020. Rachel Reeves has accepted an invitation from the Eurogroup to go to their summit next month. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has more.
The US election on the horizon has many in Europe thinking about their ties with countries closer to home. The coming visit from Reeves, a month after the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary went, is a sign of the UK's further attempts to deepen cooperation with the EU. It's not just diplomacy, though, but economics. The Chancellor is under pressure to boost growth. Her government thinks reduced border checks and new visa rules might help, although crucially, they draw a red line at rejoining the single market. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
And Apple is exploring a push into smart glasses with an internal study of products already on the market. It sets the stage for the company to follow the likes of Meta into an increasingly popular category. Bloomberg understands that the initiative, codenamed Atlas, involves gathering feedback from Apple employees and focus groups. Our chief correspondent Mark Gurman says the practice is commonplace.
Now, before Apple enters a new product category, it often does this. It creates these employee studies, does them internally as a way to not let these types of initiatives leak out publicly, right? Obviously, we found out about this one. And this is indicative of the company being at an early stage of exploration on this topic, but I believe they are pretty focused on trying to go after the smart glasses for Meta.
Bloomberg's Mark Gurman speaking there. The studies are being led by Apple's Product Systems Quality team, part of the Hardware Engineering division.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. On the markets, on Wall Street, the S&P 500 closed down 0.3%. Stock futures now are steady to flat for the US. The US dollar fell 0.4% as the Trump trade faded after new polls. That was yesterday. US Treasuries 10-year yields have maintained their 9 basis point rally, and Bitcoin yesterday fell by 3%. This morning, you have much lighter liquidity and volumes in the Asian trade. The CSI 300 is up by 2 full percentage points. Crude futures, which soared 2.9% yesterday, are also flat this morning at $75.04. It really does feel like everyone in the US and really around the world is waiting for this election result.
We're going to bring you more on that in just a moment, both the politics and how markets are preparing. But another aspect of this story that caught our eye is the number of Americans who are looking at services to move them elsewhere, perhaps linked to the results of the election.
I know, and it's either way, really. Whatever your political leanings, apparently, uncertainty in the US means that is driving demand for expat services. Bloomberg's Sarah Rappaport's been writing about how companies that advise Americans on how to move abroad, be it to Portugal, to Italy, here in the UK, that they're becoming busier than ever, or have been busier than ever in the run-up to the election. Blame election stress is what she says.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, it's a very interesting read of the fact that people are considering making those sorts of moves on the back of today's vote. Just, of course, a few hours to go until polls open in what's expected to be one of the closest US presidential elections in modern history. In the final hours of campaigning, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have been focusing on swing states, including Pennsylvania and Michigan. Our senior editor, Bill Ferries, is with us for more. Bill, what were the final messages then from the two campaigns?
Well, you're right. Donald Trump, I think, just wrapped up or is wrapping up a post-midnight speech. Kamala Harris and her campaign wrapped up one in Philadelphia on the stairs made famous in the Rocky movie in the last hour or so. Not a lot of new policy proposals, as you can imagine, in these final speeches. A big push by both sides, encouraging people who haven't voted. And so far, more than, I think, 75 million have, but encouraging those who haven't to get out. And in terms of the messages, you heard a lot of focus about the economy from both sides. You had Kamala Harris on stage saying that she will go after companies that engage in price gouging, particularly at the grocery stores. She talked about her plans to provide tax breaks to small businesses. And then on the Trump side, you heard a lot, again, like a typical campaign speech. She talked a lot about tariffs. He asked Americans that question that helped Ronald Reagan all the way back in 1984 or 1980, actually. He said, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" That's been part of his standard pitch. So the two sides just trying to see what they can do to get out any voters who haven't voted and those who maybe haven't decided whether or not to vote.
Yeah, and the polling up until voting day has looked incredibly close. Donald Trump secured this last-minute endorsement from the podcaster Joe Rogan, and we gave you the list of all the celebrities who were at Kamala Harris's events, Oprah, Lady Gaga. So how much does that matter, do you think?
You know, overall, I have a hard time seeing how celebrity performances or endorsements on the last night of the election season will really swing someone. But, you know, it's all possible. I do think Joe Rogan has an audience that both campaigns, I think, covet, and that's largely younger men. And that's a group that doesn't really tend to turn out in very high numbers in elections. That's a group that is leaning very much towards Trump. So the Rogan endorsement, maybe like on the margins of the margins at this point, might get a few more people out. But I don't know if you weren't going to go out and vote at this point in the campaign. I'm not sure if Joe Rogan on the last day gets you there.
Bill, what are the key next steps we should be watching out for as we look towards after polling day?
So, you know, the polls start closing, I think, as early as 6 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. Indiana is one of those states that closes first. Now, Indiana is a all in on Trump. There's no doubt that he will win the state. But if you're watching at home looking for trends, one thing will be how well are Republicans doing in Indiana? Are they up by 55% or more, or is it a little more like 52-48? If Republicans are underperforming in a state like Indiana, that's probably a tough signal for them in terms of battleground states like Wisconsin and Michigan. There are some House races you could watch. The 7th Congressional District in Virginia is a very tight race. It's historically Republican, but Democrats have held that seat. That's one that if it's going for the Dems, it's probably a good sign for them, and Republicans would love to take that seat back. So even in areas where Trump is expected to win or Harris is expected to win, those margins might give us a little bit of information about what's coming later in some of these more crucial battlegrounds.
Bill, thank you so much then for those pointers. Our senior editor, Bill Ferry's there. Let's flip, though, from voters to investors. We've seen heightened volatility across equity, bond and FX markets. And then this morning, actually, lighter volumes and real nervousness are creeping into markets. Let's bring in Bloomberg's markets reporter, Valerie Teitel. We've seen a dip in US Treasury yields and a softer dollar. What does positioning look like now?
Look, a lot of the positioning and nervousness is focused in FX space in the dollar. The dollar is seen still as the cleanest way to play this election. On a Trump win, you get a stronger dollar. On a Harris win, you get a weaker dollar. And it's being played out through various currency pairs, one of which I want to talk about is the Chinese yuan. Dollar CNH and dollar CNY, the 1 week implied option volatility is at record levels. We are really, I guess, preparing for the fact that a Trump win could mean that U.S.-China relations in terms of tariffs really goes to, I guess, another level more than what we saw the tariff escalation in the previous Trump regime. We also have seen elevated levels in dollar Mex, the Mexican peso, as Trump has reiterated even just yesterday his move on tariffs in Mexico. And then the third currency pair that has seen stretch volatility is euro dollar. Again, the European economy is very much exposed to tariffs, not even that, but the planned defense spending that possibly a Trump administration could force European governments to spend more on defense. In terms of other markets, the equity market, the S&P 500, we've seen bearish hedges come into play, so investors looking for downside protection there. But it's been more nuanced when it comes to the equity picture. We've seen crypto stocks, those are at heightened volatility levels. Trump win could seen as pro-regulation in terms of crypto assets. And then on Harris win side, we've seen a surge in implied volatility for clean energy stocks. That is a more of a Harris trade there. When it comes to the Treasury market, we have seen a lot of de-risking over the last few sessions, especially yesterday when this Trump trade was a bit unwound in the market, Caroline. So perhaps this the de-risking in Treasuries means that we could see a big surge in volumes later today, this evening, tomorrow morning, perhaps, when a winner becomes clear and investors are more willing to reestablish those positions in the Treasury market. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Okay, lots to watch out for. Valerie Teitel, our markets reporter, thank you very much for joining us. To another story now. The UK has spent more than a year trying to get hundreds of guns removed from floating armories that are helping Russia profit enormously from its oil trade, despite widespread sanctions. Joining us now with more details, Bloomberg's reporter Alberto Nardelli. Alberto, good morning. What are these floating armories?
So essentially, floating armories are hotels in the middle of high-risk bits of the ocean for security guards and floating storage units for guns. This industry emerged a couple of decades ago when there was a spike in pirate attacks off the coast of Somalia, and oil tankers and cargo ships that were traveling in those areas needed security to protect them from attacks. Now, countries in those areas didn't want a load of guns stored on land, so this idea of floating armories was developed, and companies started to security companies started to rely on them to protect ships going through those areas, basically.
But how does all of this help Russia then with its transportation of oil?
So basically, when the West and Europe in particular introduced an embargo on Russian oil, Russia had to start finding new places to sell its oil, and most of it is now going to Asia and India in particular. So as it transports its oil to India, its tankers have to go through that route. And so it has come to rely on this type of service to keep its oil safe as it ships it to countries like India.
So what does the UK and guns that were once licensed in the UK have to do with all of this?
So much of this industry in its origins was developed in the West. So you had British companies, American companies, and lots of the licenses that were provided both to the armories, which allows them to store the guns at sea, and to the security companies, which allows them to move the guns onto these armories, were British. And what happened last year is that the UK revoked the licenses that a company needed to manage free floating armories. And what the revocation of a license means is that security companies that use those armories have to move those guns to somewhere licensed. And that was about a year ago. And since then, very little has happened because the various companies have, in the meanwhile, moved out of UK jurisdiction. And so there's actually very little that the UK can do to try and retrieve these weapons.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.